Beneath a sky heavy with steel-gray clouds, the wind howled through the skeletal trees, carrying with it the sharp sting of winter's cruel breath. The earth was a frozen canvas, cracked and bleeding frost, where even the sun dared not linger long enough to warm the bones of the land. Across that unforgiving expanse, a solitary figure moved with hesitant purpose. A woman cloaked in tattered shawls, her footsteps shallow and uneven in the thickening snow. Evelyn May had been wandering through the wilderness for 3 days, though her mind held a lifetime of wandering before that. The frost clung to her eyelashes like tiny diamonds, sparkling briefly before melting and trailing cold tears down her hollow cheeks. Her breath came in ragged, trembling clouds, each exhalation a whispered prayer that the cold would not claim her before she reached shelter. Her limbs ached with a weariness that went beyond the physical, a fatigue born of relentless rejection. Memories came unbidden in shards, jagged and raw. The sharp edge of her mother's final glance as the door slammed behind her. The bitter whispers of the townsfolk, their eyes sharp as barbed wire. Too fragile, they said. Not strong enough for this land. Yet the ache within her was not from the winter's grasp alone. It was the silent cruelty of being unseen, unclaimed, and left to dissolve into the endless snow. The weight of her solitude pressed down on her, colder than the frozen ground beneath her boots. She remembered the day she was told she didn't belong. Too plain to catch a husband's eye, too meek to carve a place for herself among the wild and rugged. The town's gossip, led by Maggie Lou's sharp tongue, had painted her as a ghost of promise, a shadow passing through without ever truly arriving. Even Sheriff Boone, with his hard-set jaw and wary eyes, regarded her as a liability, a blemish on the town's rough-and-tumble veneer. Yet Evelyn pressed on, each step a testament to quiet resilience. The creek beside the trail had long since frozen, but she knelt and scraped away ice with trembling fingers, catching droplets of snowmelt that tasted of earth and desperation. Her stomach gnawed with a ferocity that blurred the edges of her thoughts. Hunger was a steady drumbeat beneath the howling wind. As the sun dipped low, casting the world in a pale amber light that flickered like a dying flame, Evelyn glimpsed a distant shape on the horizon, a cluster of weather-beaten buildings nestled beneath the shadow of towering pines. A ranch. Somewhere to rest, somewhere to belong. Her pace faltered, muscles threatening to give way beneath the exhaustion. The wind stole the warmth from her bones, but the hope of shelter flickered brighter than any flame. She reached the ranch's sturdy wooden gate just as twilight surrendered to night, the cold deepening into a silence that wrapped around her like a shroud. Her boots slipped on the icy ground, and she collapsed against the rough-hewn door, her body folding in on itself. The world spun dimly at the edges, the ache of hunger and cold dulling into a numbness she had long feared. Her fingers clutched at the doorframe, seeking something solid in a world that had become uncertain and hostile. Inside, Rhett Callahan paused from his evening chores, the faint sound of Evelyn's collapse carrying through the thick wood. Rhett was a man carved by the land, broad-shouldered, with eyes like storm clouds that held more warmth than he let on. His hands, calloused from years of tending the earth and cattle, moved with surprising gentleness as he opened the door to find her there, small, shivering, fragile. For a moment, silence hung between them like the heavy snow outside. Then, Rhett bent down, his voice low and steady, breaking through the frozen stillness. "You're home now." The words were simple, yet they held a gravity that settled deep into Evelyn's aching bones. As Rhett lifted her carefully inside, away from the biting cold, she felt the first fragile stirrings of safety, of being seen not as a ghost or a burden, but as someone worthy of kindness and shelter. Outside, the wind continued its mournful song, but inside the ranch house, the hearth crackled with the promise of warmth. Evelyn's eyelids fluttered closed, surrendering to a sleep that felt more like a rebirth, a quiet pause in a life marked by cold shadows and whispered doubts. Yet even in this moment of refuge, the shadows of the past lingered, and the road ahead remained uncertain. The town watched from a distance, their whispers like frost biting at the edges of her fragile hope. But within the walls of Rhett's ranch, a slow-burning ember of something new had been kindled, something that might yet grow strong enough to defy the winter and thaw the deepest cold in Evelyn's heart. And so, beneath the watchful gaze of the stars, a story began. Not one of loud declarations or grand gestures, but of quiet resilience, whispered promises, and the unspoken truth that sometimes the greatest strength is found in the softest touch. The morning light seeped through frost-rimmed windows, casting fractured patterns of gold across the worn floorboards. Inside the quiet warmth of the ranch house, the steady crackle of the fire was a soft hymn against the lingering chill that clung stubbornly to the corners of the room. Evelyn's breath rose and fell in gentle rhythm, the tension in her body slowly loosening like the ice thawing along the edges of the creek outside. Rhett moved with a careful grace, each motion deliberate and measured. He fetched a blanket woven from faded earth tones and wrapped it tenderly around her shivering shoulders. His voice, low and steady, held no judgment, only the kind of kindness that was forged in the hard soil of long winters and silent struggles. He poured hot stew into a chipped tin bowl, the scent rich and smoky, a balm to her empty stomach and aching spirit. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she accepted the bowl, the warmth seeping into her skin as much as into the hollow spaces within. She ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a fragile promise of a future not yet written. Around her, the world was still, save for the soft murmur of the fire and Rhett's occasional quiet hum, a sound more felt than heard. In the hush between them, words were sparse, yet their silences spoke volumes. There was no rush, no demand for explanations or declarations. Instead, a delicate thread began to weave between them, unseen but palpable, a shared understanding born from hardship and unspoken pain. Rhett's eyes, deep pools of storm-dark gray, watched her with a gentleness that both unsettled and soothed. Outside, the town remained a distant specter, its judgmental eyes fixed upon the pair through whispered rumors and wary glances. Maggie Lou's sharp tongue cut through the saloon smoke like winter's edge, weaving tales that painted Evelyn as a schemer, a woman grasping for a place not meant for her. Sheriff Boone, ever vigilant, cast shadowed looks toward the ranch, his presence a reminder of the fragile peace that hung between acceptance and exile. But within the sanctuary of the fire's glow, those voices faded into insignificance. Days passed in quiet ritual, small acts of care that spoke louder than any vow. Rhett repaired the worn hem of Evelyn's coat, his fingers gentle as he mended more than just fabric. She, in turn, fetched wood and tended the fire, her movements growing stronger, more assured. The cold that had once seeped into her bones now receded, replaced by a tentative warmth that stirred in places she had long thought dead. Their connection unfolded like the slow bloom of a winter rose, fragile yet determined to survive against the odds. There was no need for grand declarations, a shared glance, a brush of hands, the way Rhett lingered a moment longer at her side as the wind howled outside, each gesture a stanza in a silent poem of growing trust. One evening, as the storm outside unleashed its fury, snow whipping against windows in relentless sheets, Rhett stood firm at the door when a figure from the town appeared, his silhouette sharp against the swirling white. Sheriff Boone's voice was low but edged with accusation, warning that the town would not tolerate what they deemed an unwelcome alliance. Evelyn, wrapped in her newfound courage, met the sheriff's gaze with a steadiness that surprised even herself. The shame that had once shackled her spirit loosened its grip, replaced by a quiet dignity forged in the fire of her trials. Rhett's presence beside her was a silent shield, an unspoken declaration that she belonged here, under this roof, within these walls, in the fragile hearth of a man's steadied heart. The storm raged on, a tempest that mirrored the turmoil outside and within. But as dawn broke, painting the snow in hues of soft pink and gold, the world seemed to exhale. The harsh winter softened, and with it, the sharp edges of fear and judgment began to round. Evelyn stepped outside, the crisp air filling her lungs with a clarity she had not known in months. Rhett stood close, a steady presence, his rough hand brushing gently against hers in a gesture both tender and resolute. There were no promises spoken, only the profound understanding that here, amid the vast wild land, they had found a home, not just of wood and stone, but of shared resilience and quiet grace. And so, the story lingers, a whispered tale carried on the winter winds, reminding us that sometimes the deepest warmth is found not in grand declarations, but in the soft spaces between words, in the steady presence of another soul who sees us through the cold. For those who listen, the land holds these stories, of hearts mended, of strength born from silence, of a home waiting patiently at the end of a long, cold road. If this tale touched your heart, Stay with us and subscribe, for many more whispered memories await, where hope is kindled quietly and love grows in the smallest, most profound moments.